I woke up at 5 a.m. this morning and I felt like a disturbance in the force. I woke up at 5 a.m. this morning, felt a disturbance in the force, looked at my phone, boom, right there. The king of liberals, Ezra motherfucking Klein, the king of liberals, wrote an article defending me, saying I'm not an anti-Semite and that people are insane, which is awesome. This is going to be a very bad day for a lot of centrist liberals who have desperately tried to maintain their grip of control, their grip of influence, their grip of power over the Democratic Party in an environment where there are a lot of people who demand more from the Democrats. So that was the conversation for the last 3 weeks, and it's obviously coming to a close, and there are concessions being given right now. It's fantastic. It's phenomenal. I never thought we would get there. Anyway, are you going on Ezra's show now? I mean, I'm talking to him, so we'll figure it out. The New York Times changed the title from Hasan is not the enemy back on the list, big dog. Wait, what did they change the title to? Because that was a good title. Hasan Piker is not the enemy. This is why there's no liberal Joe Rogan. Okay, that's a fine title as well. But that's good. You guys don't understand how politics works, I don't think. You should understand how politics works. This is how politics works. This is a good thing. Okay, this is absolutely a good thing. This is a healthy thing. There's healthy friction existing in the Democratic Party. They probably would have done a better job if they just like never addressed this issue and just like kept people like ourselves on the sidelines. But they chose to fight this battle over a pivotal race, Abdul El-Sayed's race, and one is fantastic for two reasons. Okay, number one, it gave much needed media attention to this Michigan Senate race that Abdul wasn't getting because he's a phenomenal candidate. Okay, that's number one. Number two, this is a healthy conversation to have. It's healthy friction. I got the coveted folks tweet from Dave Weigel. Okay, he's joking, obviously. But this will do numbers with lib moms, by the way. I know there are white wine moms in the countryside that are going to see this and lose their minds. Be like, why can't every Democrat talk like this? This is exactly what we need right now. Because this is how I feel. And this is the real me. When I'm up, that's the real me. You know what I mean? This is the pivotal message for a lot of Democratic Party voters who face themselves to be centrists, right? Like, but aren't actually centrist at all. Glad you're in a good mood, Chipper. Yeah, you want to know why I'm in a good mood and I'm chipper? For the last 3 years, I've been called a terrorist nonstop by dumb shitters on the internet who desperately want to be recognized by the centrist flank of the Democratic Party, who have actively made it their lives' mission to present me as this spoiler, as this bad guy. And now you have one of the top dogs on the liberal side that every centrist leans into, that every Democratic voter listens to, that treats his word like the gospel, turning around and out of nowhere, by the way, literally out of nowhere. I had no idea that this was coming. Ironically enough, I had talked to Noah Colwin about potentially, doing some possible media hits in like on Jewish papers, right? He was like, "Oh, you should do Jewish Currents." I'd be talking to Peter Beinart. Anyway, Peter Beinart reached out to me a while back. I said, "Yeah, let's do it." But I always told Noah, I was like, what would be the best possible way to have this conversation is with Ezra Klein, who is the king of liberals and also the king of like liberal Zionism as well, right? Because that would be a very productive conversation. I know that he would most likely have a very open-minded conversation with someone like me, just like he did with Ta-Nehisi Coates, right? So from that perspective, this is like, this is the greatest. He just did it on his own. I thought I would be able to like reach out to him and do a podcast with him, but turns out wasn't even necessary. He just wrote it himself. This is not just about me and my reputation and the reputational damage I incurred. That's irrelevant. That's secondary, right? As long as I have you, none of that shit matters. As long as I can still have a platform that I can say the truth on, and I'll keep pushing, right? But this is a very consequential change. The reason why it's a very consequential change is because this is a concession, an open concession from a liberal who is, you know, very important in the liberal intelligentsia, who approached the issue with charitability and said, it's ridiculous. Like, this is ridiculous. And it's not just about me. It's about this movement. Said we have to align with these guys. That's huge. Because remember, initially, the conversation was like, Hasan is bad. Democrats need to stay away from him, you know? And what did I tell you? What did I tell you at the time? I was like, this ain't about me. This is about you. This is about all of us. This is about a change that is happening in the Democratic Party, who the Democrats should be more responsive to, right? What issues the Democrats need to highlight and need to lead on. Not just Israel, but Medicare for all as well, right? Economic left populism. These are things that I advocate for, and the collection of all of those resentments is precisely what the establishment feared. The establishment wanted to push aside, right? They wanted to make sure that they never had to have that conversation. They didn't want to talk about the message, so they wanted to shoot the messenger and disparage the messenger. Because the moment that you talk about that message, all of a sudden people are going to be like, wait a minute, I do agree with that. Now I feel like you're yelling at me, right? So this is a huge step in that direction. I think this is a first of many significant concessions to the left flank, okay? Very consequential. And we only got here because all of you stood strong and you were steadfast in your approach, in your advocacy, said, nah, we're not doing that. We're not playing that game, right? In any case, I suspect that some liberals will take this lightly and will wave the white flag quietly. I saw Trey Easton of Searchlight Institute straight up saying, you know what, that's right, we're good, right? We're good. We should be done with it, right? We should be done with this shit. We shouldn't be fighting with Hasan. Why are we doing it anyway? Like, he says something along those lines, right? Which was really funny to hear. He's been one of the diehard, most frustrated individuals on this issue, right? He said, I don't think Hasan Piker is the enemy. I just wish that he and his followers didn't treat the Democratic Party like it's their enemy. Never Trumpers exist in the Democratic coalition without repeatedly bashing the party and demanding it take specific stances in exchange for their votes. If this is how he'd like to be treated, he should consider adjusting his own posture. See, this is the problem. Never Trumpers don't even need to make those concessions. They don't need to make those demands because the Democrats already leaned into that. That's the problem. That's the reason why we're having this conversation. If the Democrats were more responsive, if the Democrats were more responsive to our demands, and our demands are the popular demands, our demands expand far beyond the people that tune in and watch me here every day, far beyond people who watch the TikTok clips and agree, far beyond the people who go on YouTube and only watch the clips. Our demands are popular demands that many Americans across the board, people who've never voted for the Democrats, people who self-identify as independents, and even Republicans living in the countryside, these are their demands as well. So not only is this good politics, it's good policy, but it's also good politics, Not only is this good policy, it's helpful in advancing people's material conditions. You know, if you were standing proudly and saying, we are the Medicare for all party, we're gonna fix healthcare in this country, we're gonna fix housing in this country, right? We are the party that says Israel, right? Like, that is a broadly populist message, right? So it's not even the Democrats being responsive to us and our needs. We're not like petulant children on the side, you know, demanding this shit for no reason. We want the Democrats to push for these policies because it'll also win elections, ensure that Republicans never win again, and last but not least, it will improve people's material conditions. That's what is the most important, most consequential aspect of this at the end of the day. This is why there's no liberal Joe Rogan. Now, originally, the title was, This is Why There's a Dr. Jihad. Just kidding. The original title was Hasan Piker is not your enemy, right? Hasan Piker is not your enemy was the original title here. And a lot of people are picking some choice quotes out of this, okay? Great piece overall. I'm going to go through it. I'm going to read it with you guys, and a necessary one, and one that is ultimately very consequential. and one that also vindicates me even in this community, because for years, a lot of you have been very angry at Ezra Klein for good reason. I have my disagreements with Ezra Klein. I've let him know. I've let him be known time and time again, but I always maintain the position that he is far more responsive and far more open-minded than the average liberal is, right? Like, I've always said, I don't know what it is about Ezra Klein, but I think there's something about Ezra Klein that regardless of his liberalism, he's not as firmly planted his heels on the gospel of neoliberalism, or at least like he's more open-minded to and more responsive to what the is actually going on, right? I said, I have my differences in opinion with Ezra Klein, but I appreciate this thoughtfulness on the discussion around reducing ideological opponents to 10-second quotes, platforming, and of course, the reality that the Israel discourse has shifted out of the old constructs mainstream media clings onto. I do not like that Ezra basically says in the article that ethno-states are a normal thing. Yeah, we have our disagreements, okay? You pick and choose. All right? It's fine. You have to understand, he's not going to come out and write an article and be like, Yahya Sinwar is like vindicated or something. He's not going to do that. Like, what are you, nuts? This is a important moment because he is, in many respects, saying the truth, okay? And unfortunately, in this day and age, saying the truth requires courage. It's important. It's an important step in the right direction. I'm not going to cast aside. I'm not going to just like shit on him for doing that. Okay. I'm not going to shit on him for doing that, especially when he could have just as easily leaned in or never said anything about this, or just as easily leaned into the same exact narratives over and over again. This is an important step in the right direction. Okay. This is an important step in the right direction. You have to be more graceful and more gracious when you receive these kinds of gifts. Okay. Because sometimes if everyone is lying, saying the truth is a gift, okay? I mean, ethno-states are a fairly normal thing. Unfortunately, a lot of states are ethno-states, but Israel's unique part is being an ethno-state while occupying an equal number of people who are not of that ethnicity. Yes. Also, ethno-states are not good regardless and are inherently self-defeating. One of the best examples of this is obviously Japan, right? That's Japan is destroying itself in order to maintain its ethno-state status. So what more do you want to see? I mean, there are living, breathing examples of how, the maintenance of an ethno-state ends up being totally untenable. All right, this is why there's no liberal Joe Rogan. Let's get started. It's a 12-minute, 55-second article. After the 2024 elections, there was panic among Democrats about the absence of a liberal Joe Rogan. Could one be found? Could one be created? It was an epic exercise in missing the point. You cannot have a liberal Joe Rogan because Rogan is not particularly political. His audience cohered around conversations with comedians, MMA fighters, bodybuilders, and psychonauts. That's what made him politically influential. He could reach millions of people who were not otherwise interested in politics. The problem Democrats actually had, one of them anyway, was that they didn't like Rogan and criticize others for going on his show. They tried repeatedly to cancel him for his comments about trans people, his skepticism about COVID vaccines, to the extent that he is now a right-coded figure. It's not because he started that way. Rogan's political views are mixed. He backed Bernie Sanders in 2020. He supports universal health care and abortion rights. He dislikes vaccine mandates and lacks border control. But it shouldn't have been a surprise when, after years being attacked by the left, he endorsed Donald Trump in 2024. The simplest way to tell people which side they're on is to tell them how much your side hates them. Now, I don't even fully agree with this assessment, right? Although I agree with the spirit of being a little bit more tactful in the way that we communicate. And this is something that the left also absolutely needs to understand, internalize when you're trying to build a coalition. Because think about it this way. If I was, constantly bouldering Ezra Klein, I probably would have had less interest in taking a sincere look at, what I put out there, right? It's just, we do honestly have a problem sometimes where we behave very antisocially. You don't have to make concessions. You don't have to concede on these people's worldview at all, right? Not the same as Rogan. No, I mean, I have been unbelievably critical of Joe Rogan, but there was never a moment where I was like, I can't believe Bernie Sanders would go on Joe Rogan. Whenever people brought that up, I was like, shut the up. Of course he's going to go on Joe Rogan. He's trying to win, you know? He's trying to win the election, right? Like, I obviously am unbelievably critical of Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan will never have me on his stream, his show, for that reason, right? But the reality of the matter is, it's important for people to go on Joe Rogan. I would go on Joe Rogan if asked. I would go on Tucker Carlson if asked, right? Like, I don't have any issues with that at all. Many in this community would have an issue with that. They say, you're platforming, you're normalizing him. Because, you know, we have our moral posture, we have our convictions, and sometimes we forget that, you know, person to person, peer to peer communication requires you to be a little bit normal and to dance around, to take the victories that you get. That brings me to a more important than it might look controversy that has burst out over the leftist streamer Hasan Piker. He had a breakout moment over the past year as Democrats began obsessing over the absence of a liberal Joe Rogan, and Piker, who mixes leftist politics with a bro-ish aesthetic, was proffered as a possible answer, a category error, because, again, the whole point of Rogan's political power is that his show mostly avoids politics. But pick over Piker's years of streaming, and you can find offensive things he said, among them that America deserved 9/11, that his favorite flag is Hezbollah's, that a liberal Zionist is akin to a liberal Nazi. Now, that last two even, is not, you know, offensive to me or to many others as well. But, you know, I guess it's offensive to the perspective of the kind-hearted liberals reading the New York Times opinion editorial section on a Sunday morning. Streamer has said offensive things isn't really a news story. But then Abdul al-Sayed, the more DSA-ish candidate in the Democratic Senate primary in Michigan, began rallying with Piker. That led Third Way, a centrist group that previously demanded that Democrats draw a line in the sand and shun Hasan Piker and his fellow Jew haters, to send a letter to al-Sayed demanding details about how closely you align with his most abhorrent views. Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of the Anti-Defamation League, also known as the Apartheid Defense League, said Piker reflected the dangerous normalization of anti-Semitism in our politics. Politico then asked a number of possible 2028 Democratic hopefuls whether they would appear on Piker's show. Governor Gavin Newsom and Rahm Emanuel said they would. Representatives Ro Khanna and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez already had. Senators Cory Booker, Ruben Gallego, and Elisa Slotkin said they wouldn't. I think there's rather a lot wrapped up in this controversy, so let's take it piece by piece. Immediately goes into it and cuts away at the whole thing. He says, is Piker a Jew hater, as Third Way alleges? In an interview with the writer Aaron Regenberg, Piker addressed some of his worst comments. I find some of his answers compelling and others less so. The comparison of liberal Zionists to Nazis, for instance, is repugnant and not much improved by Piker clarifying that he opposes ethno-states. What made the Nazis notable wasn't their support for an ethno-state. Ethno-states are common. What made the Nazis notable was their effort to exterminate the Jewish people. And Piker's assertion that his opposition is to all reactionary ideology is hard to square with his admiration for Hezbollah. Okay, two things. So this is his disagreements with the way I've presented myself. Here's the issue. The reason why I say Israel is a Nazi country or Zionism is a Nazi ideology is because that is the truth. It's a reactionary, nationalistic, fascist ideology akin to Christian nationalism that we experience here in the United States of America. It's base boosted because Israel has been carrying out that violence that is the undergirding ideology of the state in order for Israel to exist as a Jewish state that is built on top of millions of Palestinians, many of which are not Jewish. You have to ethnically cleanse those Palestinians, and that's precisely how it works, right? There are plenty of states that have been designed as ethno-states or turned into ethno-states, like Japan is one of the greatest modern examples of this, right? Japan also did its own indigenous genocide in an effort to create an ethno-state, right? It's true, except modern day liberals and modern day socialists and leftists and progressives alike do not agree with those actions. Those actions of the past, just like we don't agree with the actions of the Nazis, and therefore we must not agree with the actions of Israel when it's happening in front of us, right? The whole point of learning about history, the whole point of learning about the Holocaust, the whole point of learning about, the dangers of fascism is so that we don't repeat it. It's at the core of this principle. Never again means never again for all, not just never again for Jewish people, right? So that's the point. That is why I oppose it. Now, I would love to have a conversation with Ezra Klein about this particular issue, because I find it very interesting that he's like very thoughtful, but this is a glaringly obvious blindside that he demonstrates, and he demonstrated that with his Ta-Nehisi Coates conversation as well. I think he's moved since then as well, but even then, there's an element there. There's a blind spot there where it's like, I grew up with this ideology. I learned about it, and it's like impossible for me, knowing what I know, everything that I've learned, it's impossible for me to see it as anything but. And it's a glaringly obvious moral inconsistency that he actually reveals later when he's talking about. I didn't say blind spot? What did I say? Did I say blind side? Yeah, blind spot. Turkey's pretty broadly recognized an ethno-state by scholars, but you don't see leftists defending Turkey's erasure of ethnic minorities on the regular. Exactly, and I don't do it either, right? The thing about Israel is that it is exceptional. Like, what Israel is doing is exceptional. A lot of people try to say, oh, everyone's done it, without explaining that, like, yeah, they did it in like the 13th century, okay? Like, or one of the more contemporary, one of the more modern examples of this is, the Holocaust. So these are things that are roundly criticized, like routinely condemned. It's one of the few things that most historians agree, alongside chattel slavery and the Holocaust, that was like unbelievably evil. It's historians rarely look at events that have transpired and then turn around and offer some kind of subjective sentiment to it, or they don't say this is bad, right? Usually, but those are the two things that they openly say are bad. Aaron Regenberg also had a take on Ezra's, ethno-states existing, but we'll get to that in a second. Actually, you know what? I'll just read it. Aaron Regenberg also wrote that New Republic piece, which I never would have thought would reach Ezra Klein's eyes. I know Daniel wrote one in The Nation as well, specifically addressing the smears, the accusations about my anti-Semitism. And both of these guys were like trying to, communicate to a broader audience. But it's The Nation, it's the New Republic. Like, you're preaching to the converted, right? Like, for the most part. So I didn't think that would have the impact. I mean, I'm eternally grateful for him doing so, for saying the truth, right? Because the reality of the matter is, it is objectively a courageous act. It shouldn't be, but it is a courageous act to say the truth sometimes. He says, I'm grateful for Ezra Klein's super thoughtful column today, and also appreciate that he referenced a piece I wrote on Hasan, but I need to make one, in my opinion, corrective point. Ezra wrote, what made the Nazis notable wasn't their support for an ethno-state. Ethno-states are common. What made the Nazis notable was their effort to exterminate the Jewish people. I think Ezra would probably agree, if push came to shove, that the Nazis were notable before their launch of the final solution in 1941. It'd be fair to say what made the Nazis most notable, but what made the Nazis notable is just not really defendable as a precise statement of fact. It's true. The mechanized death of all of the victims in the Holocaust, 6 million Jews and millions of others as well, that is what made the Nazis the most notable. But they were certainly notable before that, right? The Nazis were the Nazis in 1933 and 1935 and 1939, etc. They were bad, and they were worth opposing before they began their effort to exterminate the Jewish people. And I don't think it makes much sense to say we can only analogize them or learn lessons about them post-1941. And that's kind of an important point, because that's precisely what we are doing, right? That's precisely what we are doing. We're trying to stop fascism from taking root to reach its, worse conclusions. And for Israel, it has already reached that. Israel has already reached the concentration camp, death camp, Holocaust status. And they've done so in broad daylight, which is also crazy. Ezra Klein's essay on Hasan Piker at least comes out with the correct position, but this idea that we're dealing with a different Israel today ignores the fact that the romanticized Israel older people remember was established with the Nakba. Exactly. That's precisely what it is, right? That is the significant difference in opinion between someone like myself, an anti-Zionist, and someone like Ezra Klein, who at least is like more open-minded to the anti-Zionist perspective than the average liberal Zionist is, because the average liberal Zionist has completely either dropped the whole liberalism element of it and is maybe only coming back to it like J Street is, in an effort to just like hold on to whatever allegiance that America could continue having with the nation state of Israel, right? But let's keep going, because this part is just one aspect of it, because he's going to, turn around and I read the whole article, Chad, I know. But to only focus on those comments is to miss much else that Piker has said and believes. He has also said, from pogroms to the Holocaust, Jews have always been singled out by those in power as a scapegoat for the instability and economic volatility that people in power caused. A resilient, nascent anti-Semitism is a constant threat. He has called anti-Semitism gross, immoral, and a hate crime. He has promoted John Ossoff, a Democratic senator from Georgia who is Jewish, as a 2028 presidential possibility. In previous presidential primaries, Piker supported Bernie Sanders, who is also Jewish. It is an unusual form of Jew hatred that calls out anti-Semitism and promotes Jewish Americans for the presidency. I have deep disagreements with Piker, but he isn't a Jew hater. He's an anti-Zionist. And here, I think, the real stakes of this fight come into view. We are living through a rupture in both the meaning and the reality of Israel. A Gallup poll from February found, for the first time, that more Americans sympathize with the Palestinians than with the Israelis. Among Democrats, the gap was overwhelming, with 65% who sympathized more with the Palestinians and 17% with the Israelis. The difference, as I have argued, is largely generational. Older Americans still view the Israelis more sympathetically, but among Americans aged 18 to 34, 53% sided with the Palestinians and 23% with the Israelis. This is new. Before 2023, young people and Democrats were more likely to side with the Israelis. This is not a result of an international psyop or a profusion of memes. The Israel that young people know is not the Israel that older people remember. Now, this gives Ezra Klein's perspective a little bit more clarity, right? Because I've been here for the last decade and a half professionally in my career as an anti-Zionist, as an open, avowed anti-Zionist, right? The old Israel is still the new Israel. The new Israel is just accelerated and is doing this in broad daylight. It's accelerated its mowing of the lawn operations. It's accelerated its domination and complete annexation of the West Bank. But those wounds continued. Those strikes continued in the old Israel. It's just that the media environment and the perception of the Western world of old Israel was the country that dominated all of the Arabs. Okay, all the pesky Arabs that got together and tried to fight the Jewish state over and over again was met with fierce resistance, right? Like that was the attitude. A lot of boomers are still on that mindset. They don't recognize Israel as an apartheid state that is conducting a genocide, that's taking over Lebanon, taking over territory in Syria, that is endlessly expanding and is a danger to all of its neighbors and to all civilians, and even a danger to its own citizens as well, if you care about that sort of thing. So that's always been the case. It's just now virtually impossible to avoid that reality. Okay? For many who did not grow up with the old Israel, the only moral nation in the Middle East, the only democracy in the Middle East mentality, which was a lie, right? For many who only know Israel as the genocidaire state, who only know Israel through the arrogance that its envoys demonstrate, who only know Israel through Israel's domestic interests in the United States of America, constant demands for cancellations, constant demands for doxing people, constant demands for firing people for turning around and saying something that a lot of people believe, saying something that a lot of people saw with their own two eyes, that Israel is a malignant actor in this region and a malignant force in American politics for simply supporting Palestine, for simply supporting Palestinian sovereignty. It doesn't happen anymore. That was the first experience that many people had, and they will never change their mentality. It is never going back. Let's continue. It responded to the savagery of October 7 by flattening Gaza in a brutal campaign that killed at least 70,000 Gazans, taking control of more than half the territory, and herding Gazans, more than 2 million people, into the remainder. Life there remains hellish. Israel has made hopes of a two-state solution fanciful by slicing the West Bank up into Israeli settlements and abetting constant settler violence and keeping a boot on the throat of the Palestinian Authority. It has used the Iran war as an opportunity to launch an invasion of Lebanon, displacing more than 1 million people and announcing that as many as 600,000 won't be allowed to return to their homes until Israel decides otherwise. The Knesset just voted to legalize hanging as a punishment for Palestinians who are convicted of killing Israelis in terrorist attacks. This is on the one hand, like even the language that he uses, this is something that Ta-Nehisi Coates also pointed out. If you remember in that conversation that they had almost a year and a half ago, where Ta-Nehisi said, you always say the more militant forces on the Palestinian side are savages, but you never use similar language when you're talking about the Israeli side. The Israeli side is still a democracy, right? It still has that consideration of existing as a liberal democracy. So if it's a democratic decision that Likud is abiding by, they are simply operating on the majority's desires, okay? Yeah, he says right-wing extremists when it comes to Israelis, including the settlers. He says savagery and barbarians when it comes to Hamas, when it comes to the Palestinian resistance, right? People are still people. Those Palestinians still had dreams, had hopes, right? They had goals, just as the Israelis do. So that's something to consider. That's an implicit bias that comes out in moments like this. I'm obviously not going to lean into it too much because this stuff is far more important to have in the New York Times op-ed piece, right? Part of that racism is part of the state versus non-state dynamic that almost everyone subscribes to, even though you still hear it or don't hear it nearly the same language you hear for Hamas or Hezbollah as you do for Iran. Yes, we have obviously addressed this many times over on this broadcast. Americans have this established attitude about state versus state violence versus as opposed to state versus non-state actors and who gets to do violence and what that violence is perceived as. Israel is a nation state. Israel is a democracy. When they behave in certain ways, no matter how violent it is, no matter how unbelievably violent it is, we think of it as like an expression of democracy, of the democratic process in Israel. That's precisely the reason why it's very different. It's a very different calculation when you got a foreign minister who can speak to Americans, an Iranian foreign minister who can go on American television and demonstrate that, you know, he has multiple PhDs. All of a sudden, Americans can hear from him. Very different attitude is developed in that process, right? That's why it's huge that Benjamin Netanyahu is from Philadelphia. Like, this is a very consequential element. I promise you, it plays a major role. That's why he does the Hebrew language proposals, and then he does the English one. And I always tell you, there's key differences in the way that he communicates to the Western world versus the way he communicates to the Israeli population. Third way suggests you can identify Jew haters by their use of loaded words taught in social justice seminars: apartheid, genocide, settler colonialism. If that is the test, then a large number of American Jews now fail it. Israel, as it is behaving today, and as it is constructing itself for tomorrow, is incompatible with any normal understanding of liberal values. That's it. That's the truth nuke. That's also the contradictory statement that contradicts with his previous statement of like liberal Zionism is also liberal Nazism, where he goes, ethno-states exist. Chill out. That is correct. That is correct. It's just 100% correct. It is utterly incompatible with modern day liberalism. It's utterly incompatible with modern rules of conduct, modern rules of warfare, rules of engagement. It is siege warfare that most people thought we left behind in like the 15th century. America's bringing it back too. And obviously, a lot of Israel defenders will say, what are you talking about? It's because if there's no Jews, there's no news, right? Like, look at Sudan, look at Sudan. Now, the difference there is twofold, okay? What is happening in Sudan is heinous. It's a genocide. It's backed by the United Arab Emirates and therefore, in some ways, backed by Israel as well and Western forces, or at least Western governments turn a blind eye to these atrocities. But that's not because there's no Jews involved in that situation. That's because the United Arab Emirates doesn't have as pervasive of a lobby in the United States of America that constantly demands you get fired from your job for saying what's going on in Sudan is a genocide. Ironically enough, it is the pro-Israeli groups and institutions that have created this kind of resistance against Israel in the United States of America, right? That's a big part of it because Americans are somewhat selfish people, right? That's it. Because there are atrocities unfolding all around the world. The difference, the other key difference is, and this is precisely the reason why those pro-Israel groups have to exist in the Western world, is because Israel is carrying out these atrocities with our weapons. Israel is carrying out these atrocities with our unlimited funds and our unlimited defense, both political defense at the United Nations General Assembly, but also with direct defense in the form of Tamir interceptors, for example, THAAD missile launchers, anti-air defense systems, sometimes directly putting our soldiers on the line, their lives on the line to defend the nation state of Israel. That's the key difference. That's a huge difference. Okay, this will be clipped out of context and you will see it in the news XD. Wait, what? I don't know what you are even pointing to because nothing I said is wrong. Do you understand? I'm of this mindset that if, Belgium was doing what it used to do in the Congo, right? Like right now, and America was like, no, you have to do that. This has to happen. We have to also forcibly put Belgians in there, and establish settlements and stuff like that. Yeah, there would probably be similar anger and resentment. That's how it is. There will be no Palestinian state to the west of the Jordan River, Benjamin Netanyahu said. For years, I have prevented the creation of that terror state against tremendous pressure, both domestic and from abroad. We have done this with determination and with astute statesmanship. That exact paragraph in the article is why you can't be a liberal Zionist. There's no such thing. Yeah, I mean, you can be, but it's just like there's varying degrees of fascist sentiment, right? And it exists in America as well. I'm going to always bring it back to America. Like you have Christian nationalists, white supremacists. You have varying degrees of people who demonstrate that kind of like underlying racist sentiment, anti-blackness, anti-immigrant sentiment, things of that nature, right? Not every single person is going to be maxed out on the Nazi spectrum. And it's no different on liberal Zionism versus ultra Zionism as well, right? That's how it is. Some of you know people in your lives who are otherwise very kind people, but have these like massive blind spots when it comes to, the way that they approach black people, for example, right? Like maybe they don't act out on those desires, luckily, but they still have those opinions, right? Like they still carry a little bit of that resentment, a little bit of that fear, the unjustifiable fear. Our goal here is to identify that and tackle it, right? Identify that, combat it, help people come to better conclusions, right? That's how systemic racism exists. And it's not different for Zionism. Like I deal with people who have, fascist adjacent beliefs on a daily basis. I try to convince them, and it's the same for liberal Zionists as well. So it's very frustrating to me when people make it seem like there is this otherized status. When I say liberal Zionism is akin to liberal Nazism, people go, how dare you say that, right? How dare you? It's not that different from, liberals that might have some racialized animus as well, right? There will be no Palestinian state to the west of the Jordan River. For years, I've prevented the creation of a terrorist state. We've done this with determination with astute statesmanship. Moreover, we've doubled the Jewish settlement in Judea and Samaria. And we will continue on this path. Anti-Zionism is a rising response to what Israel is doing. Well, it's a response to what Israel was doing and is still doing, right? It will simply not be possible to treat it as a marginal viewpoint that can be shamed or shunned into invisibility. Yes, anti-Semitism often cloaks itself in anti-Zionism, so don't do the anti-Semites work for them. If you keep telling people that this is bars. If you keep telling people that they oppose the Jewish state, then they must hate Jewish people. Eventually, they will believe you. Felix Biederman, in the last Chapo episode, put this in less kind terms, where he said, if you think Hasan Piker is an anti-Semite and you want to cast him aside, even though he cares about anti-Semitism 8,000 times more than I do, Felix said this as a Jewish man, you're not going to like what comes next. He's right. It's unbelievable that they're still playing this idiotic game. They're just not even recognizing it, right? The impulse to cut those off with whom we disagree reaches far beyond Piker or the Israel-Palestinian debate. It sits at the heart of cancellation as a political tactic. It relies on a belief in the power of gatekeepers that might have been true in an earlier age, but no longer reflects as the way attention is earned and held. Tucker Carlson was ejected from Fox News and grew stronger on X and YouTube. Nick Fuentes was banned from major social media platforms and gathers strength in the shadows. Trump went from being banned by every major social media platform to retaking the presidency. But it's not just cancellation. It's not just that cancellation has failed to silence those it targeted. It also weakened those who used it. The Democratic Party and the progressive movement was ill-served by the belief that it could decide the boundaries of acceptable debate. In narrowing who it could talk to, it limited what it could hear and whom it could be heard by. I haven't been on Rogan's show, but I've been on some of the shows in that broader universe, like Andrew Schultz's Flagrant and Lex Friedman's podcast. I was surprised by how frustrated the hosts were about their inability to book Democrats in 2024. They had said things that the broader progressive universe disliked or had conversations with people who were anathema to the left. And so Democrats largely avoided these podcasts, ceding them to the Trump campaign. This was not only bad politics, but also bad democratic practice. These shows had come from nowhere and had gained millions of loyal listeners. They had earned their viewership by voicing something that made millions of Americans feel seen, heard, or at least interested. In avoiding those places, Democrats avoided contact with the kinds of voters they otherwise claimed to represent. This is the mistake Democrats often make when they talk about what they did wrong in 2024. They realize now that they should try to talk to the people who listen to these shows. They are less likely to realize that they should listen to the people who talk on these shows. They realize now that they should try to talk to the people who listen to these shows. They are less likely to realize that they should listen to the people who talk on these shows. Beneath this is an important principle. Conversation is not a reward to be bestowed on those with whom we agree. It's a necessary habit in democracy. The point is not to find agreement so much as to deepen understanding, theirs and your own. Whether you like everything that someone has said should be severed from the question of whether that person is worth talking to. We here on the left do this as well, and obviously I don't entertain it. And I think that's a major difference that I have with a lot of other people. And people will constantly look for other reasons as to why I do that, right? Other reasons as to why I do that, where they're like, oh, there's got to be some ulterior motive here. It's because he's hungry for clout or whatever. It's like, no, I will talk to anyone and everyone, no matter where they are. I'm not going to compromise on my values, but I will try to convince not only my interlocutor, but also my interlocutor's audience that might not have actually ever encountered my perspective, and certainly not encountered my perspective without filters. The space for such conversations was once wider. Wait, what did I? The point is not to find agreement as much as to deepen understanding. To talk with others is to believe in the possibility of change, theirs and your own. Whether you like everything that someone has said should be severed from the question of whether that person is worth talking to. The space for such conversations was once wider. In 1968, William F. Buckley Jr., the arch-conservative founder of National Review, hosted Eldridge Cleaver, the Minister of Information for the Black Panthers, on the firing line. Neither man was there to endorse the other's politics. I should like to begin by asking Mr. Cleaver whether he finds it inconsistent with his ideology to encourage the assassination of Mr. Richard Nixon. Buckley said. Cleaver's answer: I would say that if Richard Nixon was assassinated, it would only result in having another pig in line who possibly would need to be assassinated. Bars. Buckley later hosted Cleaver at his home. It was a different time, but it created a lasting artifact. The interview has hundreds of thousands of views on YouTube and remains riveting to watch. Are there people I won't have on my shows or shows I won't go on? Sure. But those judgments, for me, are more about what I think will be productive rather than who I think can be included. Similarly, I wouldn't judge Booker or Gallego or Slotkin for avoiding Piker's show. They're busy people, and it may not be how they want to spend their time. But there's something strange about aspiring to lead the country's left-wing coalition and elevating the avoidance of prominent leftists to a matter of principle. That's all the more true now, as attention isn't bestowed on the chosen few by television networks and newspaper editors. It's won or lost in a ferocious marketplace that rewards outrage and controversy. The winners of the attention wars today are typically people who said some outrageous things in the past or are still saying them in the present. When you're dealing with podcasters or streamers who talk unstructured, unrehearsed for hours each week, if not every day, there's going to be so much said that it's almost inevitable that a dossier of dumb statements can be compiled. To write those people out of acceptable political discourse is to back yourself into a shrinking, sanitized corner of the public sphere. This part is also huge. Booker admitted on Pod Save America that when he said he would never go on Piker's show, he had never heard of Piker. His communications director had read him a list of the 4 or 5 worst things Piker had said, and Booker used that as the basis for his response. Booker got piled on for that admission, but I appreciated the honesty. That is, in practice, a version of how many of us make our judgments. Algorithmic media is an engine of motivated decontextualization. We see other people in snippets that serve the agendas of those who cut them. We are fed 30-second clips shorn from multi-hour streams, 2-sentence quotes ripped from long conversations, old comments that obscure subsequent change. We have to be careful about being lulled into believing these shards represent anyone's whole person. We should not be afraid of finding out who those people are, of seeking to change them, or of allowing ourselves to be changed by them. That is bars. It is fundamentally what I believe as well. It is at the heart of my politics. It is one of the things that I constantly say, and I'm glad that a liberal is saying that, okay? I'm glad that a liberal is saying that at a time when, let's be real, this kind of cynical standpoint epistemology and identity politics and cancellation attempts are the tool of the right, okay? The right will always use that to their left flank. The right will cynically apply this to the likes of Gavin Newsom, as we saw, right? But then the center right of the Democratic Party has consistently used this as a tool, as a weapon to destroy their left flank as well. Bernie Sanders was victim to this, right? A guy who has been on the right side of history for most of his life, if not his entire life, that spans across multiple centuries at this point. He's 800 years old. And liberals cynically presented him, painted him as this monstrous person, this like, this figure of reactionary sentiment, this anti-black, anti-woman, misogynist, all this stuff, ridiculous. Rodemi Adoy says, honestly, everyone keeps talking about this woke 2.0 thing, but the Hasan Piker discourse has convinced me that the second iteration of this in 2028 will be far more nasty than the 2020 campaign because of the idea policing and PC-sensitive crowd will be more aggressive. Like the screen grab is going to look like light work when 2028 happens. I don't think so. And a candidate is apologizing for an influencer that worked years ago who said one off-color thing, and people are trying to burn this candidate forever about it. Will be interesting. I don't think so. I think if our forces win, then I don't believe that this will happen, and I hope they will, right? Because it's objectively silly. It's self-defeating. It doesn't, it betrays how normal people think and how normal people operate. It doesn't make any sense to behave like that, right? Democrats do need to open up and improve and open up conversation. But in the example follow that Mr. Klein gives, there's an enormous difference between William F. Buckley's time and ours. Eldridge Cleaver would almost be certainly arrested and imprisoned under our current regime. I mean, I think, as a Black Panther back then, he was also under significant threat. The American government was assassinating its leadership. So Democrats do not need a liberal Joe Rogan. They need a Franklin Delano Roosevelt banger. Last night, I, a Jew, and a Jewish friend, both Gen Xers, were bemoaning the state of Middle Eastern politics. We grew up planting trees in Israel, and like many of our generation, have steadfastly defended that country against its detractors, even when the detractors were right. Now we both feel that Israel, like Donald Trump's America, isn't defensible. We can't just twist ourselves into the necessary pretzels for such an exercise. We're not happy about that. We don't feel somehow liberated. It's incredibly sad. But there are some things we simply can't buy, and Israel is now one of those things. Like it or not, the Jewish diaspora in Israel are tied at the hip. We're expected to support Israel financially, militarily, spiritually, no matter what. Indeed, we are shunned by our community if we don't. The government of Israel also demands this blind allegiance, and yet, where is my vote? Do I get a say in whether Ben-Gvir or Smotrich sits in the Knesset or on the cabinet? Israel wants my money and my fealty, but not my opinion. Well, I have news for my Israeli brothers and sisters. I have an opinion, and it isn't a good one. Ooh, that's a Gen Xer. Remember, that's like outside of the younger demos, right? Because you all in here, the Jewish anti-Zionists in this community obviously have encountered a Gen Xer in your lives that definitely is not that open-minded, right? So that's huge. Larry, but we don't send $4.8 billion, provide diplomatic cover, and veto legitimate UN sanctions for other countries. Great column. I'm frustrated by Democrats who refuse to campaign everywhere and who can't see the enormous opportunity of reaching voters listening to the hosts whom they disagree. It's quite simple to understand that people understand when they are being condescended to. Tim Walz, former football coach, not going on the Joe Rogan to yab it out for Kamala in 2024 will always bewilder me. He would have been a perfect Democrat for Rogan's audience to hear from. I agree with that as well. At Larry, for my entire 70-year life, this is like a reply to Larry, I guess, who like maybe, oh, he deleted it in shame. Okay. A lot of people are just like dunking on Larry. For my entire 70-year life, the U.S. has had a unique and close connection with Israel that I once felt good about. Israel meant just for deeply persistent wrong people, the settler movement, the extreme right wing, and finally Netanyahu and the end of hopes for a two-state solution or just for Palestinians, and then killing 72,000 Palestinian civilians corroded and then severed that connection. Now I cannot support U.S. aid for Israel, and I feel deeply disappointed, hence the unique focus and degree of criticism. The 30-second clips Hasan is talking about are a huge part of the problem. This media fragmentation disproportionately targets women in politics where their tone or character is scrutinized and taken out of context far more than their actual policy platforms. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's one that certainly favors, because in 30 seconds, you can't understand everything that a person is about, right? You can't understand their full scope, who they are as a person, right? What that format actually favors white dudes in many respects for that reason, because what can you pick up about a person? How can you make up your mind about a person? By looking at who they are, right? They hear, my name is Hasan, I'm Muslim, and I represent this worldview. They immediately lean to certain biases. They make up their minds about my perspective for that reason. It's the same when they see a woman, right? A black woman especially. It's the same when they see a black man. Yeah, most people are defending this. I bet most Democrats who object to Piker have never listened to his show. Instead, they've been presented with a few clips of the most outrageous things he has said and told themselves they want nothing to do with him. I saw this in real time on an episode of The Bulwark with Sarah Longwell and Tim Miller, hardly a left-wing show. She read out a series of Piker's quotes and argued why she wanted nothing to do with him. He was an irredeemable anti-Semite. There was nothing more to discuss. The whole conversation was a knee-jerk reaction to anything that smacked of criticizing Israel. It's horrific treatment of Palestinians before and October 7th. Dude, this is exactly what I was saying. You see? Ellen from Philadelphia, who is a Bulwark fan, saw what Sarah Longwell was saying about me, calling me an heinous anti-Semite, okay? And immediately went, I have heard this before. Do you understand? Do you understand why I kept saying over and over again, we're in a very different environment. We're very different media environment. People can actually see the full context now. They can come to me, but also very different ideological environment as well. Very different environment that hears outspoken critics of Israel and sees outspoken defenders of Israel call them anti-Semites for years and years and years. And they go, I've heard this before, right? This is precisely what I was talking about. It's part of the reason why I was like, I'm not worried about this shit. And it's outside influence in American politics. In some circles, you're just not allowed to point out what Israel is doing, while the rest of us stand here horrified yet afraid to say too much, lest we be accused of being anti-Semitic. A brief reading of the comments of that video showed just how far apart Sarah was from her viewers. Unfortunately, Democrats are so afraid of offending, they easily offended in the party, that they don't know how to have honest conversations with people with whom they might have some disagreement, especially when it comes to Israel. It's really quite discouraging and not likely to build a larger coalition of the very people Democrats say they want and need to attract. There seems to be more policing on that issue than there is on anything else in the political discourse right now. It is not helpful. In this column is the answer to why progressives, of which I one, have lost so many voters and the solution to getting them back. But to accept this truth and start winning elections will require the very few human beings, the things very few human beings can do. Let go of the sense of superiority. It gives you a sense of self-esteem. Be genuinely open to dialogue with those you disagree with. Actually talk with them. And the hardest of all, be open to changing your mind. The path to power lies before you. So yeah, I think everyone's dunking on Larry. I suspect, judging by what people have said, judging how people have responded to Larry, I assume he was like, why does everybody care about Israel so much? You know, because everyone is like, yeah, you know, it's giving Jew hatred a little bit, sweetie. Remember, this is the New York Times subscription base, right? This is the New York Times editorial page. These are the people who wrote 524 comments so far on this article that just came out a couple hours ago. Okay? So just understand that this is not, you know, the HasanAbi head constituency. Okay? These are the Barbras and the Debras. These are the highly educated, urban and even sometimes suburban white liberals with a higher degree of educational attainment, and also ones that are financially better off. Okay, we're talking about the coastal elites that play a major role in the base of support for the Democratic Party, at the heart of the Democratic Party, the ones that go out and vote in the primaries, the ones that go out and vote in special elections. This is who is ride or die for the Dems. So for them to come out and lean into what Ezra is saying is huge. Something has changed. This is what I've been repeatedly explaining to you over and over again, and I've seen it with my own two eyes, right? The New York Times closed the comment section. They have almost 600 comments, so they turned it off. I was going to comment, but it shut down. Too many people supporting you. That drives the editors. No, they like the comments. I'm subscribing. They shut down the comments because it was too much. It backfired. I'm just a regular guy that wants to understand what the elites think. No. I think they do that normally. That's fine. In a couple hours once it comes out. I don't think that the editors hate clicks and conversation that takes place under their profiles, under their editorial pieces. I must admit, I was lost reading most of this article, as if I was continually caught in an ideological maze that I could not exit. The habits or mindsets I developed over the years of running a small organization were dismissive of abstract theoretical discussions, always focused on how to make the systems and personnel work better. Really, what the American voter is yearning for is a government that works, that repairs roads, provides decent health care, that keeps schools safe, that provides affordable childcare, housing, transportation. I could go on. But attending to the details and processes of a well-run organization leaves little time to debate or discuss the meaning and implications of the cultural vocabularies now circulating in the podcast circuit. If I have to choose between someone who, whatever their flaws, stands firmly against ethnic cleansing and genocide, and someone who, whatever their virtues, won't be unambiguously against these crimes and their perpetrator, my conscience requires me to side with Mr. Piker. That's the argument. That is the reason why when people were like, oh, Hasan, how do you feel in this moment? You're getting inundated with like smears and shit like that, right? I said, I don't feel lonely at this point. It doesn't matter, because the people who are choosing to present themselves as enemies of myself and this community are choosing to present themselves as enemies to the overwhelming majority of the population that has seen heinous acts of violence perpetrated with our tax dollars and demands change. It's a 90-10 issue, right? It's a 90-10 issue. The moderates in the Democratic Party constantly complain we need to reach out to other voters and stop canceling each other, that the extremists in the party keep forcing them into unpopular positions. Then they run into a genuinely popular voice like Hasan Piker, and because he insults Israel and pushes Medicare for all, he needs to be canceled and ostracized. Even those ideas are much more popular than moderate positions like unlimited aid to Israel and no limits on drug prices. Who really are the extremists? This is also another attitude shift that is brewing, okay? This is also important to understand. I believe it was Morris Katz who did the ad campaign for Zohran Mamdani and Fight Agency that had a really interesting podcast, had a really interesting conversation on, I think it was the Nation's podcast, Fighting Fascism podcast, where he basically said, Americans think Trump is a moderate. It's true, they do. Americans think Zohran Mamdani is a moderate. Americans think Bernie Sanders is a moderate. Americans think Kamala Harris is a radical. Why? Now, of course, demographics play a role in this, but Zohran Mamdani is a brown guy, right? He's brown, he's Muslim, he's a socialist, and he's an anti-Zionist, right? So Kamala Harris is partially seen as a radical because she's a black woman from California, certainly plays a major role in that dynamic, as opposed to Donald Trump, who is an insane person and yet seen as a moderate from their own, from, the perspective of the base on his side. Now, why is that the case? Because Trump is a populist. He is a right-wing sloppulist that has been, especially in the first 2016 election, a heterodox Republican, right? He had a lot of positions that he advanced, like not touching Medicare, not touching Social Security, things like that, that were truly unique to the Republican position. Never been heard of before from any Republican, right? While simultaneously leaning heavily into anti-immigrant sentiment and racism and things of that nature. The aristocrat political pundit class completely oblivious to how the median voter thinks. They're how you get situations like Kamala campaigning with Liz Cheney. The average American thinks Kamala Harris is a radical because the only things that they've heard from Kamala Harris are choice quotes that the opposition has defined her as. someone who is only invested in giving bottom surgeries, the Guatemalan undocumented migrants. Why does the median voter, why do the Mainers not see Graham Plattner as a radical, whereas the entire commentariat sees Graham Plattner's worldview as far too radical for the moderate to vote for? Why is that the case? Why is that the case? Why is there such a major disconnect with the way that the average voters perceive Graham Plattner versus the blue sky liberals and the commentariat and the way they see Graham Plattner? Because Graham Plattner is uncompromising in his advocacy for trans people, but Graham Plattner is offering every voter something that they can understand, that they can associate with. Graham Plattner is talking about affordability. Graham Plattner is talking about Medicare for all. Graham Plattner is talking about cutting ties with Israel, okay? And he's not doing the political language around it either. He's not approaching the subject matter with the careful way that you normally hear from experienced politicians, right? That's it. That is the reason. What mainstream media has presented as radical propositions is a lie, especially when you look at how the median voter approaches that stuff. Mainstream media and the analysts and the people who are backed by corporate entities and corporate interests will tell you Medicare for all is a radical proposition. People don't want that. People are terrified of that, okay? People are terrified of that. They don't want it at all. Please don't advocate for that. And the politicians hear that and they go, yeah, that must be true. And a lot of liberals hear that and go, I'm internalizing that message. I agree with it as well. I'm a real Deborah, as you say. I'm 62 years old, college educated, New York Times, HasanAbi head, even a wine drinker. You've pegged me 100%. Exactly. Also, Debbie, you shouldn't say you've pegged me. That's, oh no, that means something different around these parts.